Hello and welcome to this video. This is the recap for round 4 of the London Chess Classics. So what did we have in this round? 5 games, of course, and it was an interesting round. And I have to say that it's a bit tricky to cover all of it because the games were all somewhat interesting. And I'm going to start with the in comparison, least interesting game. This is Giri Aronian. We got an English opening. Giri is going for this, and it goes for this line with e4. This is an interesting choice, usually leading to a longer maneuvering battle. However, there's one interesting feature of this position. We're going to see that. This kind of thing. It's something that is very interesting. White now has the bishop pair, where we see that there's a bishop on c1 and a bishop on g2, and you would assume that white wants to open the position to make this bishop pair more effective. Right at the moment, this bishop, for example, is looking at this pawn. It doesn't make a very powerful impression. The thing is, White does not want to open the position. Quite the opposite. He wants to keep the position closed for the moment because he is lagging in development. He wants to keep it closed and open the position later on his own terms. What Black wants to do is he wants to use his development advantage. It would be bad for Black to play something, let's say, like d6 in this position, after which White happily continues with something like this, and later maybe like castles, f4, and so on, slowly trying to expand and gain space. Black wants to play in a fast fashion. He wants to open the position quickly, and this starts with c6. c6 and d5. Quickly try to use the development advantage. Interestingly enough, Giri plays in the same way with Black. He had a fun game with Black against Shahriar Mamedyarov only in 2014. I think that was Qatar Masters or something like that, one of those strong open tournaments. And Mamedyarov played a knight e2 in that game, and then also d5 was played. And Giri won a very nice game and a good attacking style. Here you played knight f3 with white, so he plays it with both colors. And Aronian goes d5. That was the idea. White has to do this. And now we see Black has castled already. He's got the rook on e8, and he's got very clear development. Knight c6, bishop f5. Queen c2 was played, and now Aronian goes queen c7, directly attacking this somewhat weak pawn. He also could have just developed, but why not attack the pawn? White can try to cover it, but those moves don't look very good. I mean, something like this, ultimately, you have to reckon with ideas like this. Not right away, but it is in the position, and Black still can just develop if he likes. And bishop b2 looks a little bit more interesting at first, but bishop f5 already has the first concrete threat of knight b4. So Black should be okay as well. Giri just gave away the pawn. Okay, here we go. What does White have for the pawn? He's catching up in development, and in fact now, as he has castled, now it is his move. He probably has a slightly better development. Even he will also gain a tempo on that knight. So here White has an interesting choice. He can go bishop b2 as Giri did, or rook e1. Rook e1 is a little bit more ambitious, and something like this is a possible line given by the engine, where White is a pawn down, but definitely has some kind of compensation. One idea is, for example, that this square is rather weak. This can come here. Interesting. But White is, for the moment, full pawn down. Giri plays here. He's more of a safe player, so he decides to get the pawn back. But this allows Black to catch up in development here with knight c6. And I think here Black has probably equalized. That knight comes back to b6. Bishop c7.
Check.
And again, black is getting his final piece into the play. White has got the bishop pair, but white also has got weaknesses to look after. And it is a fairly drawish position. This is interesting. Aronian also could have taken here just like that and just be okay. It is a much simpler way to play, but this is probably working. There's nothing great for white available. For example, here if white takes on b7, there's rook b8, and something like this is just not very much. White has this pawn here, but black always has ideas like bishop h3, and yeah, that's okay for black. Giri played bishop a7. Rook a1. Yeah, it's quite funny if you ask the computer here, it gives rook b1 as a good try. Bishop a2. The idea is that rook b2
check
doesn't help. So the engine gives rook a1. Sorry, it gives bishop b7. This is what I wanted to show. Bishop b7, bishop b1, bishop c8, and Stockfish gives white 0.7. It's funny, yeah? So the engine has a very high evaluation of the bishop pair. Of course, this is just a dead draw, yeah? I mean, I'm a huge bishop pair fan, but 3 against 3 on one side of the board where the non-bishop pair side has 0 weaknesses is just an instant draw. Yeah, so funny computer evaluation. Okay, rook a1, and now b5 is an important move. Moves that pawn out of the scope of the bishop and threatens b4, trying to fix a weakness there. So white has to attend to that with a3, and here we can continue a little bit here. That traded down to a complete draw. Yeah, so we had a probably for some people interesting opening battle there with c65 being somewhat counterintuitive maybe to some players, but it is really the right way to play. If you play in a slow way with d6 and b6 or whatnot, then white is building up happily with his bishop pair. It's a case of where the side with the knights wants to accelerate the play. This is really the term that describes it best, I think. He wants to make it fast, make it tactical in a way that the knights can do something real quickly before the bishop pair gets set up properly to use his powers. Okay, so let's go now to Grishuk versus MVL. And this is one of those games where you know that there will be time trouble, and you have a very good guess with the opening, and it is the knight off. MVL plays the knight off. Grishuk usually plays the open Sicilian, so we've got the knight off, and Grishuk goes for the old main line, bishop g5. Yeah, bishop g5 was all the rage in the 1960s, 70s, maybe also in the 80s. And then subsequently got replaced by bishop e3 at the main move. But nowadays still bishop g5 is the sharpest move, I guess. So e6, f4, h6, retreats, and queen to b6. That is a modified version of the poisoned pawn. Yeah, the poisoned pawn, as Fischer played it, was queen b6 on move 7, without h6 and bishop h4 inserted. There are a couple of nuances there between the two versions. I have to say that I'm not a very knowledgeable person about this opening. I played the knight off, in fact, for a couple of years when I started with chess, which is kind of crazy, but it was one of the first openings that I learned because I started out with Fischer's games and he always played the knight off. But back then I learned bishop e7 and knight bd7 as defenses, and it's like 25 years ago. So I'm kind of I'm not an expert. Grishuk went a3. That's an interesting choice. He covers the pawn. Why is that covering the pawn? Because queen b2, knight a4 leaves the black queen without any squares. It's a funny way to cover the pawn, but it happens quite often in many openings that a3, by taking away the a3 square, is covering this pawn. Yeah, queen d2 is the main move. This is what I saw in the database, but I don't make a theoretical survey now out of it. Yeah, bishop e7, bishop f2. So this is an interesting point. The bishop from h4 can drop back to f2, so the black queen feels uncomfortable and retreats to c7. Queen f3, b5, g4. So we've got a very nice, sharp Sicilian position. Knight c6, castles long. So this is one of those nowadays relatively rare cases where we will see opposite sides castling, very likely. Okay, black has not castled yet, but it's likely that this is going to happen. It's interesting to note that this innocent looking move h6 has far-reaching consequences, as now we can already see a further short castles runs directly into g4, g5. Okay, bishop b7, very logical, and h4, pushing on the king side. Yeah, here MVL opted for d5, a direct counterplay in the center, not castling yet. Interesting choice. Grishuk now went e5. I think this is probably best. He could have taken, but after knight takes d4, bishop d4, knight takes d5, I think black is good. Yeah, there's this big threat, and white doesn't have any particularly great option here. Something like bishop g2, for example. Black can also just castle, and nothing bad seems to happen. We have to note that black also has a half-open c-file, so it's not that white can just like play g5 and play for checkmate. e5 I think is the better choice. Knight e4, takes, queen c3. Okay, if white takes, knight d4 is going to be embarrassing. So he had to move the queen on the side. And now rook c8, covering the queen on c7 and piling up on the c-file. Yeah, it looks like it's a sharp position, but it feels, at least at first glance, pretty balanced. Rook h3, getting out of that diagonal finally. Yeah, and here white has to trade. f5. Yeah, it's still a pretty sharp position. We have the queens traded, but there are many things going on. Black has this play on the c-file and against the king, but white has that space advantage on the king side and already has advanced to f5. Okay, castles on move 11. So black has delayed that to a moment where it feels reasonably safe. Yeah, white now can take on e6, but it doesn't net that much. Note that all of a sudden this rook is active. Yeah, and I mean white can absolutely not take as c2 hangs. Yeah.
Check.
Yeah, so what should he do? Grishuk went for bishop e1. Yeah, removing that bishop on the f-file and also having a look at that knight, so that something like f6 gets to be a more interesting tactic. Bishop d5. And now g5, trying to go f6. Very, very sharp position. So what happens now if black takes? f6, that was the point. Yeah, now this is an overload of the bishop. Takes. Yeah, and now where should the bishop go? If you go like here, then white will just take, and the open h-file is super dangerous. No? Black can give check here, but oh god, so this is possible. And that didn't help a lot, yeah. It can be really ugly quickly, yeah. This, for example, is going to be mate. It's a very tough position to play. MVL went here, yeah, go for the c2 square and pawn. Bishop b4, yeah. White had to get rid of this and now played f6. Instead, he also could have taken on h6, but that doesn't help that much as black can take here and the white knight cannot take due to c2 being under such heavy pressure. Very sharp position, but it seems to be balanced. f6 instead is better. And now interesting choice, king h7. c3. Black took, and now took the g file. That was the idea behind king h7, to take on f6 and then use that open file. Yeah, that's a pawn, but who cares about a pawn? This is such a dynamic position that the pawn is not so important. Here black has a couple of ideas. They're connected to the e-pawn and the move rook g2. White now played knight b5. Note that Grishuk is in this typical time trouble already. And knight b5 I think is a good choice because it leads to what happens in the game pretty much, yeah, almost by force. And I think white can be okay with the development of the game. He has got no time and the position is very tricky. Okay, this is what happened. Attacking that bishop. Bishop here is the only move that makes any sense. Rook b6. Takes, and now we see that this knight is hanging and doesn't have that many squares. Knight d4 was played in the game. This was the sharper alternative, but black is just in time with rook g2 to counter-attack. And here the likely result is a draw. And an interesting point is that b4 is not leading to anything because of the capture.
Check.
So this was played. And now after takes, rook g2, black's counterplay is sufficient for a draw. At the end we got that draw. Yeah, note that the time is not quite okay here. The relay time is a little bit irritating, but Grishuk was in time trouble, but it wasn't it wasn't enough to alter the result of the game. He had no time, but it was easy enough, let's say, that he could manage even with just a couple of seconds on the clock. An interesting Sicilian battle with a little bit more, let's say, under the surface than I have now shown in the video, but I want to make sure that I don't get such epically long videos this time. I want to get a good overview so that you have an idea what happened in the games, but I don't want to analyze all the games in such detail that we got like 90-minute videos. I mean, I look at the statistics, yeah, and there are just like 2 or 3% of the people watch the whole 90-minute videos. So I think a good compromise is in order, showing the most important things, but don't make it too long. Okay, let's go for the next game, and this is Topalov Caruana. That is an important game, as every game is important in this event. We have to be honest there, but it's Topalov is had the lead in the overall Grand Chess Tour before the event, but had an absolutely rotten start, and he needs a win badly to get back into the race. And of course, Caruana up to now only has played draws, and a win would be quite nice. So let's see what happened. Okay. It got interesting. I have to admit, it got interesting. Let's see what happened. D3. Bishop c5. c3. Okay, I've shown it a couple of times already, but white cannot win a pawn here due to that tactic. So c3 and castles. Again, white cannot take a pawn. It's important to know. And d5 leads to excellent gambit play for black. He's in very good shape with his development, and white has to be cautious to not getting into big trouble here. Okay, knight bd2 was played. Topalov is not castling. Note that he's delaying this move, and this leads to interesting play. Knight e7, Caruana going over to g6. Very good regrouping. The knight on g6 has some ideas in regards to that, and sometimes black can play c6. d4. And just back to b6. Yeah, Topalov now took on e5 and played queen e2. Could he have taken on e5? Well, it leads to interesting play. Black has a couple of ideas. One idea that the engine is giving is the move queen to d6, just attacking this knight and asking how white is going to handle this now. If you go back, then knight g6 is a simple recipe. Yeah, why is that a move? Or why is just castling not good? Black has some compensation. One idea is that right here, bishop h3 is an interesting choice. Note that this bishop is very strong. If white now takes, he's going to
check,
lose right away. This is not going to end well. So here he has to go e5, and this might lead to a draw, just about, for white, but it's a rather dangerous game. Yeah, Topalov just played queen e2. Yeah, developing or putting out the queen, and after knight g6 now faced an important choice. Knight f4 is a really annoying move, and what are you doing now against it? He decided on a very risky plan, strategically risky. He played g3. Why is that risky? Okay, if you play g3, how are you going to castle short? There's always this h3 pawn hanging. Okay, you can argue, let's play h4 then. But this is a really substantial weakening of the king side. So it's a risky decision. With this, Topalov is basically saying, I'm going to keep my king in the center for a while, or castle long. And this is in fact what he did. He went for, let's put this on the board, went for long castling. That's a very rare occurrence in the Ruy Lopez, and in this particular position, I think everything points to black being in very good shape, but it's not so easy to prove. Caruana now plays the most normal moves, bishop e6, and goes b5 to open up the position, or trying to open up the position. If white now takes on b5, knight takes e4 is excellent for black. The knight is very strong here, and we already see ideas of potential sacrifices here on c3. So white cannot take, and he went c4. And this is a move that is enormously committal. Yeah, with c4, okay, black played b4, can put that on the board. With this move, you're essentially killing your own piece there on d3. That looks like a very stupid piece now. And you basically commit yourself to find compensation for the bad bishop, and also the very weak square on d4. First glance is that Caruana is clearly better because of that, but things are not that straightforward. I think he really should be better, but it's difficult to prove. Yeah, this was played. And this is the only reason why white's position is playable in the first place, that this knight is pretty strong. Knight d7 and knight e1. The idea of knight e1 is that white maybe wants to use the f-pawn in the further course of the game. Yeah, knight e1. Here, I think Caruana made a mistake. And, well, I think it's pretty clear that this was a mistake now. It's not just my exclusive opinion. He went c6. What black wants to do, ideally, is, of course, put a knight on d4 somehow and get rid of the d5 knight. So you want to play c6 under the most favorable circumstances. c6 so that the knight has to go back and then somehow reroute so that a black knight might come to d4. It's very difficult to accomplish. It's really difficult to do. I looked at a couple of lines, but they are not entirely conclusive. For example, something like a4. If we start with a4, knight g2, and then something like rook b8, yeah, trying to maybe play rook b7 and then c6. I know it's slow, but I just want to show the idea. Then white goes f4, and this is not clear at all. White has f4, f5. After c6, he can drop back, and this is not clear at all that black is in good shape. I mean, the position is interesting and very double-edged. But it doesn't look like a refutation of white's setup. And it really feels like there should be something. Queen d6 is an interesting try. Immediately going for c6. But after bishop c2, there is this idea. And yeah, black probably has to take on d5 now. And there are not many alternatives. Yeah, takes on d5. And now white has to recapture. C-pawn takes, E-pawn takes, rook takes. I think E takes looks like the most logical move. All of a sudden, that bishop gets strong. I think here black has nothing to fear in particular. He can go knight c5 next, for example, and has the A and B pawn. But still, the position doesn't feel completely conclusive to me. Some of those lines, however, he probably should have played, as c6 is even leading to a white advantage. Knight c7 here, and now Topalov captured. This kind of double pawn is not necessarily a weakness in all cases. It looks weak, the pure structure looks weak, but often you can compensate by control of squares. So d4, for example, is an important square that is controlled by that double pawn, and also d5 is very reliably controlled. It's difficult, however, for black to organize his pieces. You would absolutely love to get a knight on d4, but how? How exactly? Now with the pawn on e6, this is not a possible route. And moving the queen, playing c5, then knight b8, then knight c6, then knight d4. This is very slow. And Caruana never manages something like that. h4, bishop back, and knight d3. Now this knight is activated, and he goes for the trade. White is also quicker on the d file, and we see that this knight is a terribly bad piece now. It is on g6, it doesn't attack anything and looks at mostly controlled squares. If we could magically, and it would really require magic, transfer it to d4, then black would be in great shape, or even c5 if we are a little bit more modest. But it's difficult to accomplish. It's really difficult to do. Now there's the pressure on the d file, and Caruana decides to capture. Here we go. This is why the bishop is still not such a bad piece. It attacks something important. Queen c5, rook d2, covering the f2 pawn. Yeah, this trade. Nothing that black did with a smile on his face, I guess, as the disappearance of that c4 pawn means that this bishop will get strong.
Check.
Yeah, or here. Yeah, and here it's pretty clear that around here Topalov has excellent winning chances. His bishop is so much better than black's knight. He's got 4 against 3 on the king side, which is helping with the potential attack. And all in all, many endgames will be winning for white. For example, if you trade queens, you can be pretty sure that you will win this. It's, however, not something you can force. Yeah, no queen trade, of course. Again, no queen trade. Yeah, just to show if black is trading queens, white is a lot better. He has some straightforward ideas. Rook c6 to attack that pawn. You can bring the king up. And black is also somewhat helpless. He's always tied to that e6 pawn. So he kept the queen on the board. And we have an interesting moment here. Rook c8, played by Caruana. He's covering the c5 pawn. Yeah, and now you can ask, what about bishop a6? Isn't that a move? Yeah, it is a move, but it seems to be that after that, Caruana is getting enough counterplay. I am not 100% sure, though, I have to admit, because I had limited time in the analysis, and I wouldn't completely rule out that there is something for white still. But we have a look, and you will see why I'm unsure. Bishop a6, queen a7, that was the point. Black is giving away the rook.
Check.
For this counter attack. Queen takes a2 check. King back to d1. And now c4. It's amazing. Caruana has sacrificed a full rook at the moment, but he's got a huge counterplay with those 2 pawns and the queen. Yeah, how does that continue? Rook d2 was played by Topalov. That's the best move. If you go rook d4, then b3 is already rather dangerous and requires white to give back his rook. There's no way around it. And check. This kind of thing here.
Check. Check.
Is a straight is a straightforward draw. There's absolutely no doubt there that black will manage a perpetual here. He played this. This is the tougher choice. Check. And here we go. It seems that this is a draw. I mean, I looked at it a little bit with Stockfish, and it ultimately always gave draws, but it's not so easy. The computer is not just giving like 000 straight away so that you are sure, but rather gives white some slight advantage. But if you go deeper and deeper and help a little bit with some forcing lines, then you'll see that it will jump back to draws, to perpetuals nevertheless. Yeah, queen f8 played. Yeah, he's giving up the rook, but there is no real alternative to that. If white tries to keep this piece, there is b3 coming, and this also doesn't help. Yeah, this is an interesting try. X takes.
Check.
But here white only has a
check.
Perpetual himself. Yeah, queen f8 is the relatively toughest. Took. White has to take.
Check.
And now check on b2. The engines actually give a different check. They give queen c3 as a little bit more precise.
Check.
But I think it's still a draw,
check.
To be honest.
Check.
This is
check.
very forced. Yeah, it's the only way for white to trying to escape in the first place. And now there is the move h5. And this is the big point, something that Caruana needs to have seen somewhat beforehand. Now the king is trapped and we threaten the perpetual. Only way for white to avoid it for the moment is g4.
Check.
And now, yeah, queen f1 was also an alternative, but Caruana takes, and I think it is a draw still.
Check.
Even though the game is not over yet.
Check. Check.
Black has a ton of checks. Of course, you could analyze this a little bit and look at alternatives, but it's very tricky to do. This is essentially a queen endgame. b3. Yeah, it looks slow, but the b pawn is dangerous, and this bishop is kind of out of the picture. This is the best try.
Check.
And now white still has a pawn up and he will get the b pawn. I just
Check.
want to look at one particular situation.
Check. Check.
So
Check.
we've got to this, yeah, with white still
Check.
having a pawn,
Check.
but with the open
Check.
white king position, there's still
Check.
very decent drawing chances here. After queen g6, it's a definite perpetual. Some other move, which is a great analysis, I know, but some other move, queen c5 check, queen g5 check, they would have at least continued the game. Very likely it's a draw still, but it's not a draw that is immediately confirmed by an engine. Yeah, that there's no direct perpetual, which happens after queen here. So he had to check. And let's say continue here, but it's difficult for white to make any progress. The computer also is not so reliable here because it always sees series of checks for white, which makes the whole line longer and longer and longer and longer, and it doesn't really recognize that white is not able to make any progress with that open king. In the game, queen g6 was played.
Check. Check. Check.
This was a direct draw.
Check.
There's no way to avoid it. Yeah, something like this. There's a check here. And this is this typical
Check.
kind of
Check.
pursuit by the king, by the queen, always lining up against white's queen, so white can never like go here and allow this. So at the end, a draw. A tough fighting game that saw first Nakamura being, Caruana, that's the next game. Caruana being comfortable. And then Topalov got a big advantage, but then there was this situation with bishop a6. Of course you can argue, if we go back again, of course you can argue that Topalov could have played something different here and just keep his advantage. I mean, he has many moves that he can play that are better for white. It's a5, h5 or something like that, just a normal move. But it's of course very tempting to grab the rook, and he decided to go for it. Because he probably did not see a direct draw. Probably correctly. I mean, there is no direct draw. But it seems that maybe h5 was a better choice at the end to keep more pressure on. Very tough game. Okay, so that means Topalov stays on -2 and Caruana on 50% after having played 4 draws. Okay, Nakamura is actually not the next game. It's Carlsen, Mickey Adams. So let's pull that one up. So let's see if the drawing streak for one of those players is going to end. World champion Magnus Carlsen has played 3 draws. He's gotten close to wins, but it hasn't materialized yet. And Adams, being Mr. Solid, let's say he played 3 draws and wasn't in any danger any of those games. Very good performance. So Carlsen goes for a knight f3 g3 setup, which is yeah, actually what if I was his trainer, yeah, his coach, I would recommend him to do stuff like that and skip the 1e4 openings. But okay, we'll see if this was any better than the Berlins and things like that. Okay, he plays this kind of Retty style opening. This is a position that easily could happen in one of my games, as I play this kind of opening with white. And I admit that it doesn't look very exciting at first, but what it usually does is it doesn't simplify early on. It keeps most pieces on the board, and there are no clear lines that black can play that would kill the game outright, as it sometimes happens in let's say e4, e5 openings. So Carlsen traded here. We captured. A funny little tactic you should always be aware of is this thing. Tactic is a strong word, yeah.
Check.
It's a blunder, yeah. Yeah, never fall for that one. So e takes, knight c3, castles, h3, and e4. Yeah, that is the whole idea of white's setup there, with c4 and the capture on d5. The idea is not that cheapo with queen a4. The idea is that this position is in fact rather interesting to play. Quite often, if black decides to capture, white has a 4. That was wrong. A 4 against 3 pawn majority on the king side, and this often is the this often leads to interesting play. White like moves the queen away, bishop out, knight away, and then f4. This is the general idea, getting all those pawns into motion, and this very often leads to interesting attacking play even on the king side. I think this is one reason why Adams never takes on e4 in this game. He just keeps the tension and asks white if he has any useful moves without the capture. Yeah, Carlsen immediately answers that question and goes for the capture on d5. Rook e1 and d4. Yeah, is this a position where white has an advantage? Probably not so much. But white is a little bit easier to play, as it seems that he's got more play against d5 than black has against d4. We have that typical RAM structure again in the center, something that we already had in Carlsen's game against Caruana, I think, in round 2. Here, however, the piece placement and distribution is entirely different. Here, especially, there are more pieces on the board in the first place. So, knight c7, getting that back into the game. a3, b4, getting a little bit of space. Yeah, here Adams goes for the move a6, which doesn't feel so essential. Because I mean, I don't think that b5 is a big threat, and it's not so clear that you need to make that move. And it gives white a little idea, yeah, putting the knight here, and on c5 it makes some pressure against b7. Here now black has to be, I think, quite precise. If he is making one or two more, let's say, less than optimal moves, then he can get into trouble on the queen side. He played a5, directly going at those pawns. Knight c5, takes, and rook b8 to cover that pawn. Queen a4, very logical. Yeah? White tries to maybe, oops, I am drawing like a madman here. Something like knight takes b7 can get into the picture now with that pressure on c6. Yeah, now Adams goes for a pretty much forced operation. He takes here and plays queen f6. This is a double attack, looking at the pawn and the bishop. At first you think that this is just okay for black, but if you look at this a little bit deeper, queen b3, you see that there's always this, what am I doing here? That knight d7 idea. Yeah, that wasn't possible earlier because the bishop was hanging, but now it is a threat. So Adams is covering it. Bishop g4 now. Somewhat strange looking move, but it has a very clear idea. Again, knight to d7. Yeah, and he just took the pawn. This is ultimately an exchange sacrifice. Check. Sorry, garde, not check. Attack on the queen. Yeah, queen d7. Queen c4, and now white has knight d7. That is what I was trying to say. This is the mentioned exchange sacrifice that black had planned. Now the b8 rook hangs and the d6 bishop hangs, so black has to give up the exchange. What does he have? He's got one pawn at the moment and will get rid of that b pawn. And this is happening. I want to go to a certain position. Yeah, he's shuffling the knight until he found this setup. And this is something that is very interesting to look at from a human perspective and also from the perspective of the computer. Yeah, it doesn't matter what engine you look this position, which engine you use to check this position. They all give white a very substantial advantage, something that is close to a win, like 1.3, 1.4. However, for a human player, it is pretty clear that this position must be very, 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 very close to a draw. Why is that? If you check this setup, you see that those three pieces, they are perfectly organized. White cannot attack one of them. Pawn protects bishop, bishop protects knight. There is no instability there. They all form one cluster, let's say, one unit. The second unit is the king side, the king and the three pawns, and f7 as the weakness that is attacked there by bishop and rook is protected by the knight on d6. So how is white ever going to improve from here? He can try to invade with the king. This is however difficult, as you see that the bishop is taking away squares and the knight as well. And this means there's almost a barrier here in the center. As long as black is not moving those pieces, white's king is not going to enter. So what is he supposed to do? He can push the king side forward, and this we'll see that Carlsen will do that. But ultimately, that also shouldn't help. Yeah, got some shuffling. Check. Pawn came up.
Check.
Yeah, g5. That he has one particular idea in mind that we will see in the game. Going for some sort of f5 is even less promising. I mean, right away it's probably not doing anything, but just in general, black will always be able to go here and go to f6, and then this pawn is basically lost. So something with g5 is the relatively best choice, and Carlsen had an idea which at least made it somewhat interesting.
Check.
This is what he did. Sacrificing this bishop. The idea is that after this, rook c6, this pawn is not going to be, cannot be saved. Bishop d4 had to be played. There's also this threat, so, and here. Yeah, when I looked at this, just very briefly during a live show that I had on Monday, I was thinking that white has winning chances. The pawns look dangerous, but it seems that there is not much going on.
Check.
Oops, sorry, that was a bit too quick. Check here, and this is a key idea. Double attacking this. g6 fails to knight h6 check, and something like this is also not leading to much. This is again double attacked, and check. After got a couple of checks, then g6. Knight h6 now is very nice. It will win that pawn.
Check.
Yeah, and here they agreed to a draw. I was actually slightly surprised that Carlsen didn't continue for a couple of moves. It is of course a draw, but well, yeah, we have seen weirder things happen. Okay, if you, by the way, if you want to look at this endgame a little bit, rook against the lone knight, I've made a video on that in my basic endgame series. It's about 1 year old. You can look at the playlist where you have rook against bishop and rook against knight, some examples of the play. The reason why this is a straight draw is that king and knight are close to one another. The only chances where the rook can sometimes win against the lone knight is when it is at the edge of the board and there is some kind of the king and knight are somewhat torn apart. They are kind of, there are double attacks possible, and there can be skewers, things like that. And here, with everything coordinated, nothing should happen. Okay, so again a draw for the two players. And yeah, tough for Carlsen. I mean, he had some good positions and chances, but couldn't get a win in. He seems more stable than in the recent events, but doesn't get to the point where he wins a game. Maybe next round. Okay, so let's go for the final game after 4 draws. We'll look at this one, Nakamura Anand. It's sometimes interesting to check the personal scores of players against one another. There are some weird things, yeah. Even players that are of approximately equal strength, they sometimes have huge scores against one another. I mean, famously, Nakamura has lost like 10 or 11 games to Carlsen and never won a single one. And yeah, but look at Nakamura and Anand. They have almost identical ratings. And Nakamura wins almost, he wins games against Anand, yeah, a lot of them, and he only has lost 1. I think he's +6 or +7 against Vichy. Okay, so we have a Catalan opening with Queen C2. That's a very rare line, Queen C2, that early move. Usually they play castles here, which is the absolute main line of the Catalan with black capturing. Queen C2 is an interesting sideline that I also have played myself a little bit here and there as a surprise. One idea of the line is that the usual procedure of taking on C4 now is in fact not so precise. Both queen takes C4 and knight BD2, they promise white some advantage. One idea of knight BD2 is, by the way, that the move B5 is not working at all due to, what was it? It's A4, right? A4, C6, takes, and knight G5. This is one tactical point. Just had to recollect that. H6, yeah, there's a mating threat on H7, so knight D5 is not possible to save the rook. Black has to go H6. And then H4 is a funny point. And black is basically losing. Funny little line. I had this on the board in blitz games. Okay, C5. That is the main move and something that Vichy had played before, only this year. We're going to follow that game. Castles takes, I takes queen b6, attacking the knight, rook d1, knight c6, takes. This position they had on, Anand already had on the board against Aronian, funny enough, in the Stavanger tournament. So that was the first leg of this Grand Chess Tour, where Anand ultimately proceeded to win a good game against Levon. So now time for a novelty. Bishop g5, now played by Nakamura. Yeah, what should black do against this move? We shouldn't forget that this is the Catalan and white has pretty strong pressure on that diagonal. Some simple approaches won't work. If black, for example, takes on c4 here with the queen, it looks very normal, yeah? Just take that pawn. Then white will capture and play knight d2. And this is not a very nice position for black. Note that this is just not great. And white's pressure is still very strong. Very likely white will just win the c4 pawn back and just have pressure. You know, let's say h6, drop back, something like that. And white has a great position. This is the kind of the dream position of the Catalan opening. You just have to compare the g2 and the c8 bishop and you know what's going on. So simple recipes don't cut it here for black. Anand decided to play in a dynamic fashion. In a dynamic fashion, and went h6. I think this is, I actually like how he plays, but we'll see that it is not leading to an easy game. White has to take now, otherwise it doesn't make much sense. You don't have a good square. If you go back to f4, there's this kind of thing happening. We, by the way, should mention that if you go b5 straight away, white has this point. Yeah, I had that in my notes but forget to mention. It's quite a funny line. Now threatens e5, and black cannot take because of this, and bishop e4. Yeah, so white had to take, bishop takes, knight a3. So white is much better developed. The bishop is not great on c8, but on the other hand, he was in some way forced to put the knight on that somewhat awkward square on a3. Okay, he could have gone here, but this is far less pointed, as the pressure on d5 is relieved a little bit. Knight a3 is a lot sharper. Bishop d7 and rook to b1. Yeah, directly taking doesn't help, as this is completely fine for black. Rook b1, covering that pawn there. Rook c8, queen d3. There's still some pressure there. Yeah, black cannot take on c4 due to those powerful pieces. Yeah, rook d8 was played, takes on d5, and now queen a4. So we definitely see some scenario where white wins a pawn, but black has some active play. We should also note the clock times. Nakamura is still quite clearly in his preparation, while Anand is taking time. Yeah, I mean, he had this novelty in on move 11, and the subsequent moves were fairly normal looking. Queen a4, rook d2, covering pawn, and now b5 played by Anand. Rook bd1. That was the first move that Nakamura took a long think with. Yeah, and here now it's very tricky for black to play this position. He's a pawn down, but it looks like some compensation. My first instinct when I saw the position was that black should be okay here, because the knight on a3 looks so awkward. It's on the edge of the board, and if you move it, a2 is under pressure, and I thought that black should be okay, but it's not at all easy to prove that in the actual game. Maybe black is simply not okay. It's very much possible. I looked at a couple of lines. One line that I found interesting was a6, just covering b5 and asking white how he's going to proceed. Something like queen b3, for example, is what I looked at. And the idea is that this now simplifies the position a lot. But even there, it's not entirely clear that black gets full equality. At first you think that this might be just a draw, because black attacks this and all those pawns are weak, so it looks like you should get one back or maybe get to an opposite colored bishop's endgame. But even there, it's not a completely straightforward draw. It's tough to say. It's really tough to say. What's clear is, by the way, is that b4 is not a great move, as knight c4 now is better for white. Black can take here, but after b3, black goes back and white goes here. He is better. He now has a good knight on c4, and he's got very good centralized pieces. Black now has to worry about this pawn and probably will take, and after this, those two pieces are fantastic. Yeah, so nice position for white. Yeah, Anand decided to take. Bishop takes, bishop c6, and now e4. That bishop gets some support. And here again, I mean, shouldn't black have some chances here? It looks a little bit like it, that the a3 knight is such a bad looking piece, but actually in the game Nakamura got very nice control over this position. a6 and h4, queen b4, rook b1, just covering. And he basically says that, okay, I'm going to consolidate my position, and if I get the knight into the game, I'm just a pawn up, a clear pawn up. it's very tricky for black to play this. Anand played back to a5, trying to get b4 back into the game, but now b4 was played by white. And it seems that after this and this, white definitely has a clear advantage. Maybe already has it before, but it wasn't so clear to me. While here, if you look at this more closely, you see that black is in bad shape. The queen on a4 is offside, doesn't do that much, and white has ideas to improve. This is, for instance, a nice move, rook e2. If you take the pawn now after rook e4, a5, this is a pretty terrible setup. The queen cannot move, and white can basically improve now at will. Yeah, rook c7 was tried. King g2. Now white has time to set everything up perfectly. The queen is not good on a4. And Nakamura played that really nicely now. g6, can question this move, as h5 looks uncomfortable. What should black play? It's very, very difficult to give him any advice. g5, queen d1. And now very nicely, he just gives away the pawn, because the knight is coming over to, what is it called, greener pastures. Isn't that nice? Looking here, fantastic knight. And of course at the moment this is hanging, so black is in huge trouble here. He cannot take d5 due to knight
Check.
e7 check. Tried this, but now d6. Yeah, if black takes, and he did that,
Check.
white takes here and goes back to g4. And here black is completely busted. Knight f6 is a big threat, and something like bishop e7 to cover that is answered by this. And again, there is no escaping. There are too many weaknesses. A really great performance by Nakamura, I think. Very good preparation. If we go back all the way, we have to really give him credit there. He had prepared this up to here, yeah, and white seems to be better here. He's that pawn up, and there is no clear-cut way for black to prove that this knight is really a huge problem for white. Maybe it simply isn't. At least Anand couldn't prove it in the game, and it's not that he played some very obvious mistakes. So a very nice performance here by Nakamura, who with that win joins the lead. Yeah, it's quite funny that we have three tournament leaders with +1, Giri, MVL, and now Nakamura. They all won one game, and still a very, very tight race for the first places. But Nakamura got a point now, and he's got chances in this event. I hope you enjoyed the coverage here of round 4. It still got 1 hour long, but what can you do? Even though I felt it wasn't a very thorough analysis. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back for round 5 just tomorrow. Thanks for watching.